Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything, a show where you can literally ask me just about anything, as long as it's not too personal. I want to say thank you to those of you who went and asked questions after last week's episode where I put out the call. You guys asked a bunch of questions, enough to probably get us through a few episodes. However, I don't want you guys to start slacking because of that. Get in there, ask questions. If stuff happens during the week, you're like, man, I wonder what Shane thinks about that. Pop in there and ask a question. Eventually, I promise you, we will get to pretty much all of them. I also want to say thank you to those of you who are pledging at $7 or more per month at that Ask Shane tier at patreon.com/SIFTD. The truth is, if it weren't for you guys, this show would not happen. Just being honest, we still have not hit the goal we're supposed to be at to do Ask Shane Anything. But because so many of you guys pledge at that tier, I do it anyway. Plus, I really love doing it. So thanks to all our patrons, but especially those of you pledging at that tier, maybe consider bumping up your own pledge. Let's get to this week's question. First up, we have a question from a great community member, Jay Lynn. In a recent episode of Game Face, you said you were planning on writing a book about the games industry. Can you give us a taste of what will be in it? Okay, here's the thing. It's not going to be a book like you might expect, like Jason Schreier writes. I'm not going to go behind the scenes with a game developer and dig up dirt on how they're treating their employees poorly or anything like that. It's a memoir, I guess, and actually I wouldn't mind some feedback from you folks on my memoir. So I have a couple ideas for it. The first idea is it's just literally a memoir that tells the story of my life from birth until whenever I write the book. Who knows when it will be. And then the other idea is to kind of split things up and write a book about being in the games industry specifically, and then write a separate memoir where I kind of just touch on my time in the games industry. I could totally do either approach, and as far as from my perspective, either would work out fine. I'm just wondering what you think would be something that you would want to read more. Now, I'm guessing you're going to say, Shane, I would probably just read the stuff about the games industry, but I'm not so sure about that. So I am really a rags to like middle class, not rags to riches, but I am definitely a rags to like middle class story. I literally grew up really poor. We had nothing. There were days where I went to school, I had holes in the bottoms of my shoes. So I live in California, Los Angeles. Believe me, nobody in my little dinky town that I came from has moved to California. So I do have a little bit of a success story to tell on a certain level, at least. Like, I feel like it could uplift people who are in similar situations, people who are poor and think that they have no way out. I think it could inspire those people. So anyway, those are the ideas. I have one book that's just all about the games industry and another one that's a memoir, or just one book that tells the whole story. And then if I were to do that, I would go a lot more in-depth about the games industry. Now, what you're really asking about, and I know what you're asking about, is what kind of juicy stuff would I put in the book? Let's see. First of all, I just want to say that I will remove most of the names. Like, and if I do want to use someone's name in the book, I will ask them and get their permission to use. This isn't going to be like oh, look at what this horrible thing this person did. It's going to be a story about my life inside the games industry and what it's like for someone like me who came from nothing to suddenly be rubbing elbows with this industry that is just worth so much money. It's really a crazy story. When I don't even really appreciate it myself until I go home and I'm around people from high school. Like, there's one time I went into a party, and I walk in, and the guy has a house, but then he has like a big garage where he actually like parties and drinks in. It has like a keg out there and a big screen TV to watch sports. Anyway, I walk into the garage, and up on his massive screen in his garage is me versus Terrell Suggs on ESPN. He and I debating like the top 10 games of all time or whatever. And I walked in and I was like, oh my God. And then everybody in the room looks at me and they're like, Shane. It's like, I appreciate it very much. I still can't believe that it's happened to me. And I do realize that those days are kind of gone where I used to be on TV all the time and I used to be quoted in the LA Times all the time. The funny thing about our industry is it's not really about how good you are, it's about who you work for. And I even knew that back then. Like, I knew that people wanted me to be on local LA TV or on national TV or on ESPN because I worked for a huge outlet where I would say, hey, I'm going on ESPN, check me out. And some of you guys would go and tune in and check it out. Like, I'm not an idiot. I know why I was on there as well. And it's the same thing now. It's like, my expertise didn't matter. They were hoping to get pin action from my publication to their publication. Once I was no longer working at a major publication, suddenly all those people at the LA Times and KTLA suddenly stopped contacting me. So I have no illusions about any of this stuff. So anyway, so my book would be, I'm leaning towards just writing the one memoir. I don't know how much time I'm going to have, or if I get halfway into a book, if I'm going to be like, man, I don't want to write the other one. So right now I'm leaning towards just one book, just a memoir. And if I were to do just one book, it would go pretty deep into the games industry. But what it will cover is what it was like working in the games industry, really what it's like. What's it like working with these huge corporations? If there's payola, I will address like all the things and the assumptions and the stereotypes about the games industry. And then I'll talk about some crazy things that have happened. And I don't want to spoil the stories, but back in the day in the games industry, PR events were right on the edge of like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be doing that. And again, I'm not going to share names. I doubt I'll even share the publishers or developers that those stories come from. You may be able to piece it together if you look at the dates and stuff like that and what games were coming out at the time, but I'm not going to name anybody or anything like that. So there will be some dirt in there, but I think more it'll be like a lighthearted or an insightful look inside the industry for somebody who never dreamed that he would be working inside it. So I think that's probably the angle that I'm taking, but I am open to any and all feedback. Okay, next up we have a question from SIFTD stalwart Kevin. Do you miss writing reviews? That's a good question, Kevin. I think the better question is, do I miss writing? Or would be the better question is, do I miss writing? But here's the thing. I write plenty still. In fact, I may be writing more now than I ever have in my entire life because I'm writing all the blurbs all day long for our curation at SIFTD.net. I am still writing things like dossier and stuff like that. So I'm still doing plenty of writing around games. As I like to say, I like to keep my sword sharp, meaning that I need to keep writing because it's something that atrophies if you don't keep doing it. And so I write enough to keep my sword sharp, I guess is what I'm saying. Now I will say this, like I do go back and read my reviews from time to time if I'm researching for the sequel to the game or whatever to see what I thought about an old game. And I'll just say, like, there's sometimes I read my stuff and I'm like, damn, that's pretty freaking good, Shane. I don't know if people care about that. It doesn't seem like people do. I'm usually pretty humble, but I do read some of my reviews and I'm like, all right, like you were doing pretty damn good when you wrote that. So do I miss it though? No, not really. Writing reviews is a lot of work. One thing I will say is I feel like it's much easier to express your true opinion in the best way through writing versus speaking. I always forget to mention stuff when I'm just talking about games. That's why I have a lot of notes for Game Face usually, because I'm trying to not forget stuff. But what happens a lot of times is that you get into a discussion, it's 40 minutes in, I still have like 6 bullet points on my notes, and we're out of time. So when you write reviews, you have the time and the opportunity to make sure you get everything that you want in there, and you also have the time to express it as well as possible. So I do feel like my written reviews are better than me talking about a game on Game Face, also much shorter and more succinct. So maybe there's more value for users in that way, but I do not miss writing reviews per se. I don't dread it or dislike it, but it's much easier and less time consuming to just put down some bullet points while you're playing a game instead of going in and organizing everything and writing paragraphs and making sure that you're transitioning from one paragraph to... There are so many intricacies to writing reviews. Now, writing video reviews, completely different. The scripts are a lot shorter. You need to get to the point in a lot less words. I do miss doing that a little bit because that really flexes kind of my writing muscles, so to speak. I miss doing that a little bit, like writing for X-Play and shows like that, or Game Trailers, writing our video review scripts for that. I do miss that stuff a little bit because that is shorter and it relies more on creativity than just overall work. But generally, I've written so many game reviews, literally thousands of game reviews. Every once in a while, I just scroll through like my old Microsoft Word folder, and it's just like... Okay, next up, we have a question from Commander Fett. What are your thoughts on the future of gaming? I understand it's challenging to predict its trajectory, but if you could steer it in a specific direction, where would you like it to go? Well, I don't know that I can predict where the industry is going, but I do feel like I know where it should go, and it needs to go in new directions, because what's happening right now is that video game publishers and developers are making video games for the same 20 million or so of us. Now, I know if you look at data, there are a billion gamers, but when it really gets down to it and you look at the data, there are really about 20 million hardcore gamers in America. The people who subscribe to SIFTD, who are interested in buying games every month and aren't just like waiting for their friends to tell them, hey, there's this cool game you should check out, or waiting for something to bubble up to them on social media. There's about 20 million people who are actively seeking out information about games on a daily or at least a weekly basis. It isn't as big as you think. And the problem is that developers and the publishers keep making games for those people because they're terrified that if they release a game like Dragon Age the Veilguard, it only sells like 500,000 copies in its launch month, that it is completely doomed. Now, the tail for sales is longer than it's ever been. As far as like you release a game and in some cases 3 and 4 years later, you're still selling a lot of those copies. So I feel like the industry is struggling to accept reality, which is that 20 million number is getting smaller and smaller. And you're going to get to a point eventually, if you keep following this path, where a game like Dragon Age the Veilguard is going to sell 500,000 copies if we keep doing this. So, and I've mentioned this before in various shows and on Game Face, wherever, that we need to start expanding the themes and the settings for video games. We have to stop with like the super soldier power fantasy, the perfectly ripped dude with no shirt, with the big chain gun. Like, we need to move past that. We can still keep making those games, and they can still be there for the people that want them, but we need to start dedicating significant dollars to games that focus on other things. And that is how you're going to create this next wave of hardcore gamers, because right now, we're kind of the last wave, folks. I'm just being honest with you. And when that wave hits the shore, the crap is going to hit the fan. And so the industry, I don't feel like, is forward-thinking enough and starting to try to appeal to these new audiences. I think that they are with games as a service because they think all the kids play Fortnite. No. What you're doing is you're trying to convert people like us to do things that the kids are doing. So I think right now the industry is really short-sighted, and I think if it doesn't change and evolve, that we could be in for a whole world of hurt. Now, hardware-wise, will there be consoles? Won't there be consoles? Like, PlayStation is dragging its feet more than the others, and in all honesty, that's why it's the market leader right now, because it's doing exactly what you want. Again, a part of that 20 million core audience is doing what you want, which is great for right now. It's not great for the future. So will there be consoles in the future? Certainly, PlayStation and Nintendo are going to ride that wave all the way to the shore. Xbox already is kind of getting out of the water and is doing its own thing with Game Pass. It has already said it's going to release the next generation of hardware. I think that will be the last Xbox. And after that, we all know already, Pachter talks about it all the time, they won't be using Fire Sticks and other devices, our TVs, to connect to Game Pass, and la-di-dee, la-di-da, off we go. But I do think hardware is on the way out. I do think if PlayStation tries to sell the PlayStation 6 for what it just sold the PlayStation 5 Pro for, I think that transition could be hastened as far as hardware going away. The problem is, for like Nintendo in particular, it has nothing to fall back on. Like, PlayStation bought Gaikai and has PlayStation Now, so technically it does have a game streaming service that it could fall back on if consoles go away. Nintendo, that is not the case. And so if I had to pick from the three, I would say Nintendo would be the last one standing, still releasing dedicated hardware. So there's change coming. I know it's hard because, personally, people our age, we have been in this same thing now for 30 years or whatever. It's just the way the gaming industry is to us. But I think that publishers and developers, the smart ones, will start thinking about how the industry should be instead of just how it is. All right, our last question for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything comes from Ben. Matt mentioned recently that if he didn't have to keep up with new releases, he'd work his way through the entire Yakuza series. Are there any game series that you would explore if time was not an issue? Thanks for all the great content, Shane. Ben, thank you for consuming our content and paying for our content, man. It never ceases to amaze me that people are paying for our content. It never just becomes rote. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate the kind words. Now on to your question. Man, here's the thing. Matt tends to look back with gaming a lot more than I do. Like, we have to in our jobs. We have to reference old games and remember old games to see how they frame new games or to frame our discussions on new games. So we have to do it organically in this job. But Matt is way more open to going back and spending huge chunks of time playing old games. Not even just old games that he's already played maybe more than once. I will never do that. I am the move it on guy. I want to see the new stuff guy. I played it, been there, done that. I can't remember the last game that I went back and played again. I just don't do it. And I can't. Like, you guys want to know about the new games. I need to be playing the new games. My mantra is ABP. Always be playing. I need to always be playing games that I need to cover for you guys to make sure that I can fill the channels, our content channels, with relevant content for you guys. So I never really look back. I never go to like my shelves and be like, what old game do I want to play today? I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. I said it when this generation of consoles launched, that the backwards compatibility thing wasn't a big deal for me because I never play old games. So I'm just going to start with that. It's not a thing that I do. However, there is one franchise that I have a little bit of a blind spot for, at least the early games. And believe it or not, that is Grand Theft Auto. And the reason that is the case is because when the early Grand Theft Auto games were coming out, Grand Theft Auto 3, San Andreas, Vice City, all those games, I was working at GameSpot, and I was a new employee at Tech TV. And so I was very low on the totem pole. And so I didn't get to play those games for review. I had to play those games if I wanted to just for fun. And I'll be honest with you, the first two Grand Theft Auto games were a little too crude for me. The first one in particular, I really felt was kind of like a trick. It's like, hey, we're going to make this game as depraved as possible. We're going to make sure the media picks up on it. It's going to become this sensation. I didn't find a lot of gratification in playing Grand Theft Auto 3. It got better as they started adding personality to the games. Like the first one, he's just like a psychopath. That's really the whole plot. Here's a psychopath. He's a criminal. Go play as this crazy person. As they started adding personality to the protagonist, it started resonating with me more. So I didn't finish Grand Theft Auto 3 or Vice City. I did finish San Andreas. And then I finished all the numbered ones after that, 4 and 5. So there's a little bit of a blind spot for me with a couple of the earlier Grand Theft Auto games. I thought I might actually go back and play them when they released the trilogy, and then it was just such a disaster that I just didn't bother. So it's a blind spot for me. Will I actually go back and play those games? Probably not. Okay, that's it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. Thanks again to all you guys who went and asked questions. Those will be gone very quickly. In another episode or two, we'll need more. Actually, we just go there right now. Go to SIFTD.net. There's a link in the header for Ask Shane Anything questions. Click it, go to our forums, ask me a question. Again, you can ask about anything. It doesn't have to be about games. It doesn't have to be about sports. It doesn't have to be about music. You can ask me anything. I really like the questions that kind of stray outside of the norm here. So feel free to ask them. Again, thanks to everybody who is pledging at patreon.com/sifted. A special thank you to those of you who are pledging at that Ask Shane tier at $7 or more per month. You're the reason this show happens. So have yourselves a great weekend. We'll see you next week.